Holy smokes everyone, social unrest in China is rising as the house of cards, China's crazy real estate housing market that is beyond any other bubble we've seen before, comes tumbling down. What we've seen overnight is China is entering into a liquidity crisis, and China's central bank had to inject $14 billion in the banking system to save this run on the money markets. We saw a sell-off in gold and silver last night, which was likely due to people selling off their gold and silver to cover margin positions, also to cover losses. We saw the 10-year treasury sell off as some banks may had to sell some assets to get some cash, and we saw the stock market drop a bit as well. People, I've got some new news and data, and I've done a lot more research on the situation that's going on in China with Evergrande, and it's much worse than we think. And as I showed you in my previous video, people in China are very angry, they'll put up with a lot, but when it comes to money, that's when they finally lose it.
两套房都卖了，说在你们恒大买房，你们恒大是5块钱，他们如果不给我钱，我非得跳楼不行，把我所有的。
下次是吧？来，上。
家里人呐，我们要入城乡。
So as we can see there, social unrest is rising in China. People are upset. But firstly, we have to understand, how did China get into this situation with this crazy speculative housing bubble in the first place? Well, I've been doing lots and lots of research, and the first thing I wanted to understand was China's culture. Now, I'm going to say I'm an expert on China's culture, but I have done some research that explains how we got into this crazy speculative position in the first place. So first thing first, in China, what you have to understand is there's a lot more men than women. And in order to get married, if you want to find, a good wife, it is highly favorable for you to own property. Not many families, because remember, it's not just the woman's decision, it's also the family's decision. When you marry, the girl, you also marry the family as well. They want the man to own real estate. So it's also a social status issue as well. Secondly, China's stock market completely crashed in 2015. So this has led many people to not trust the stock market, and their best bet on making wealth is the housing market. Now, another reason why the housing market has got so crazy is people are speculating, and they've taken it up 1,000. What happens in China is the government owns a land. Developers actually lease a land off the government for a maximum of 70 years. And so these apartments, they're not really built to good quality or good standard. And normally what happens is, to keep the cash cow going, is they'll demolish these buildings after 40, 50 years, etc., and then rebuild again. And so how it works is, many Chinese people don't want to buy secondhand property, because also in their culture, they think they may inherit the previous owner's bad luck. And so a lot of these apartments in these ghost cities that we're seeing, the reason why they're built is because Chinese people, they'll just buy 3, 4, 5, etc. And they don't even, finish fitting them out. They're normally just shell apartments, because they can actually sell them more as a shell apartment 3 years down the line than if someone moved in and they rented out. They don't even care about the yields, because the yields in China are only just about 1%. And again, they can just resell it for more if they keep it unoccupied. And also, previously, there's been no property taxes in China, which is something they're trying to bring in now to cool the speculative bubble. And I'll bring up a chart here to show how crazy the house prices to income ratios are. And you may think, how can they get this? Well, again, they will do anything to get an apartment. They will pull together as a family. They'll go to their parents, aunties, uncles, grandma, grandparents, etc. They'll pull their money together to buy an apartment. And also, they'll take any loans they can. They'll take credit card debt, personal loans, etc. to get into the housing market. And just like any speculative bet, The only way they can get ahead is if they can flip it in a few more years for a profit. Now, obviously, this doesn't just happen in China. This is what happened in the US subprime mortgage crisis. There's lots of speculation going on in Australia right now with the Australian housing market, but they have taken this speculation up a notch. And so, like all Ponzi schemes, it works until it doesn't. And a lot of people are speculating that the CCP will bail out Evergrande. What you have to know is why Evergrande and the housing market is in this situation in the first place is because China created something called the 3 red line rule. So I'll bring it up here. As you can see, what happens is if once a property developer hits 1 or 2 or 3 of these red lines, they can no longer get credit. And the reason China did this was because the housing market was getting out of control. These billionaires were getting far too wealthy. They've now got this common prosperity goal, which sounds good, but it may just be more like give your money to the state and then we'll distribute it. Again, China doesn't want their billionaires getting too much power. We've seen what happened with Jack Ma. We're seeing more and more of China clamping down on their billionaires or locking them up and even clamping down on their celebrity culture because, again, China, the CCP, cares about their power and being in power and authority first and the economy second. Now, obviously, they do want a booming economy, but like I said, they want to retain their power before anything else. Going back to these 3 red line rules, which is what's created this deleveraging and this downturn crashing of the housing market. So first things first, they have to have a liability to asset ratio of less than 70%. They also have to have a net gearing ratio of less than 100% and a cash to short-term debt ratio of more than 1 time. So they have to have more cash than their short-term debt. So if developers like Evergrande fail to meet 1, 2, or all 3 of these red lines, regulators would then place limits onto the extent which they can grow their debt. And so Evergrande, they've hit all 3 of these red lines. And so this is actually what China wanted. They wanted this deleveraging in the real estate market because it was creating financial instability. And so while everyone's saying that they definitely will bail them out, they actually may not. Because China may actually be learning from the US that if you bail out Evergrande, what do you think else is going to happen? Well, there's many other developers that are going to be hit in this real estate downturn. It won't just be Evergrande. And if they bail out Evergrande, then all the other developers are going to come crying for a bailout as well. And then this just increases the risk tolerance because the reason they're doing this is to reduce risk in the housing market and the financial system. But if they give a bailout, then all these developers are going to say, hey, let's keep the risk going. Let's keep on being highly leveraged because if things fail, we'll get a bailout. And this is what really should happen in the West with the US and Australia. These companies, that lose, say, for example, 10, 20% of their revenue. First thing they do is they go cry to the government and they go cry to the central bank and say, hey, we need a bailout, even though they've made billions of dollars, they've capitalized the profits, and now they want to socialize losses. They go have a cry to mama and papa, government and central bank and say, give me a bailout or the whole world is going to end. Which of course, it's the government and central banks propping up these industries like the banking industry and the housing market. They're the ones making it too big to fail. And look, if the banking sector does crash, if the housing market does crash, I'm sure we'll be able to find a solution to rebuild. But in the West, they just want the good times to keep on rolling, and all they're doing is buying time and creating more risk in the financial system and incentivizing people to take on more risk. And if they keep on incentivizing people to take on more risk, then it may get to a point when they can't bail everyone out. But again, let's go back to the situation in China and go over what this really means for you and me and for the global economy. Because look, it's starting to come more and more in the mainstream media. Listen to this, some of these headlines. China's embattled developer Evergrande is on the brink of default. Here's why it matters. And so it goes on to talk about how this is going to have a big effect on the construction industry. Suppliers are going to be affected. Banks are going to be affected because there's more 100 banks and over 100 non-banks that have lending exposure to this. HSBC has exposure to this and Standard Chartered has exposure to this. The share price dropped around 11% again today, but then again with the liquidity injection from the central bank, it did help cut some of the losses, and also they had a lunch break to stop trading. So Evergrande owns 1,300 real estate projects in over 280 cities in China. Its property service management arm is involved in nearly 2,800 projects across more than 310 cities in China. But people, next week is crucial because that's when its interest is due. They've already said they're not going to be able to pay their interest, so it's likely that they are going to default without a last-minute bailout. They've got about $600 million in bond payments due this year, and a lot of these bonds are priced in US dollars. So unlike in the US, when the Federal Reserve can just print more money, the central bank in China, they can't print US dollars. So it's a lot harder for them to bail out these companies than the US that has world reserve currency status. And so what's this caused is this caused a sell-off in the Asia bond market, and all the yields for property developers in the Asia market spiked. And so this is going to cause, again, a liquidity crisis, and it's going to make it very hard for developers to get funding, and this is going to send house prices in China plummeting, because also what Evergrande is now doing, what they said they're going to do, is they're going to discount heavily their projects, and they're going to try give some investors unfinished projects or unfinished apartments. And so what that's going to do is, if they drop their prices, then all the other developers are going to have to drop their prices too, and this is going to lead to a downward spiral in real estate prices in China. So why should us in the West worry about this? Because it's not just Chinese money that's invested in China. We've seen investors like Ray Dalio. He's been investing heavily in China, and he's been telling everyone to get out of dollars, get into the yuan, and that has worked in the short term, but the yuan may drop. We've also seen investors like Charlie Munger, who's been very bullish on China. So again, there's a lot of US money in there as well. And like I was saying in my previous video, if this does cause a big liquidity crisis, well then these Chinese investors or these developers, they may have to sell off some foreign assets, maybe some foreign stocks, some US treasuries, which will make interest rates like what we saw where the treasury yields go up. We saw a sell-off in precious metals, so we may see more selling pressure for gold and silver. And again, Chinese investors and developers have been buying up land and developments all around the world. They've been buying up property all around the world, so they may have to sell off some of the assets in other countries as well, like Australia, like the US, like Canada, UK, etc. So everyone, I think this situation that's developing in China right now is literally the single biggest risk to the financial system and the global economy right now, because we're seeing retail sales is falling in China. There's been more lockdowns. We're seeing all the supply chain issues. This is going to ruin consumer confidence there. And China has been a big buyer and big purchaser of goods around the world. So if China goes down, we're going to feel it throughout the rest of the world. So the key dates is Monday and Thursday next week when their payments are due. So don't worry, I'll keep you updated next week to see what happens if they do get a bailout or if they don't get a bailout, and we'll see what effect this has on the global markets. But everyone, that was just my thoughts and opinions on the situation. What do you think? Let me know. Now, for all my loyal viewers and subscribers still watching, you're awesome. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.